to Adventures in Life. I'm your host, Earl Beecher. I'm especially excited today to have as our guest a gentleman who was my idol throughout my youth. He was, in my opinion, the greatest musician there was. I want to read a quote from the Big Band Almanac by Leo Walker that I think covers it pretty well. It says this: Artie Shaw has to be rated as one of the giants of the big band era. Among the white leaders, he was one of the big four, along with Benny Goodman, Tommy Dorsey, and Glenn Miller. In retrospect, he may well deserve rating as number one. And I wholeheartedly agree. And Artie, I am so pleased to have you as the guest on the show today.
Thank you, Earl. It's nice to be here.
After
all the talk about getting you.
Yes, I've been excited about this. I want to show this album. This is the first record album I ever bought when I was a kid, and the records are still good. They're not cracked or anything. Well, I've guarded this with my life over these years.
They're certainly better on CD now.
Yes, oh yes, but still, that's the first one.
Well, it's like watching a Chaplin movie, you know. You like all the grainy stuff in the Chaplin movie. It goes with it. Everybody said, you know, why doesn't he fix it? No, because that's the way they should be.
Because that was really it.
That was the point of it. He made them in a certain way, at a certain era, at a certain time, and they fit that.
Artie, I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you got started in the business. I know you have some wonderful stories, and you knew everybody who was anybody.
Well, I didn't know Victor Herbert, and I didn't know Beethoven. There are a few people around that you missed here, like
Okay.
Mr. Bach.
Let's go to the swing era then.
Yeah, let's stay with that. Well, how did I get into it? I wrote about that in a book called The Trouble with Cinderella, and it bores me to talk about it, and I think it'll bore the audience if I start talking about something I'm bored by.
Well,
But
I'm not bored by it,
it.
I will tell you. I bought this book in 1952, and surprisingly, it influenced my life more than I realized until I reread it in the 1980s.
I think the reason is that I was trying to write about life rather than about the specially sort of blinded look that people have in the music business. It's like, I have a wonderful little story about a woman who was a seamstress. She worked for Mike Todd. Mike Todd sent her some tickets. She wanted to go see Oklahoma. And when at first, and it was a big splashy movie, a splashy musical. And she came back and she said, I didn't think much of it. He said, why not? She said, there wasn't a straight seam in the whole show. She was a seamstress. So that was
she was looking at the costume strictly.
She wasn't seeing Oklahoma. And most people to talk about music get so caught up in music that if they write about it, they forget this is just one part of life. So when I wrote that book, I wrote about a person seeking his way through life who happened to be in music. The book that I've just finished, which is now being read by one of the top agents in America for publication, I worked 20 years on it. And I wasn't trying to write about music. I was writing about a guy who happened to play music, but who wanted to learn everything there was to learn. Well, so it's about painting, it's about music, it's about life, it's about sex, it's about, name it, whatever life consists of.
You know, in a way, this is what we've been trying to show in this series of television interviews, Adventures in Life.
Well, yeah, I heard that. And of course, that's what it boils down to. We're talking about life, and if you happen to be a musician, well, naturally, people say, oh, is it about jazz? I say, well, that's what he did for a living, so some of it is in there. But it's as much about painting as it is about jazz. It's as much about everything else. Literature, very big part of it, because that's part of my enormous preoccupation. People say, I quit music. I didn't quit music. I started writing. And if you start writing, you can't do anything else. When I was playing music, that's all I did. But it does lead to a sort of one-track-ophobia that people have. A one-track mind people live with.
Well, people want a pigeonhole.
And we live in a world that is so complex that if we didn't have pigeonholes, we wouldn't know what to do in the morning. We wouldn't know where to get up.
I ran into this all the time at the university when I would go over to the music department to talk to those people, and they'd say, what does a finance professor know about music? And I'd usually say, well, more than you'd expect.
Well, a musician better know something about finance, or he's going to die broke, you know, which is the way that goes. You learn about everything. I was curious about everything. I still have this insatiable curiosity. I'll meet a molecular biologist, and I'll bend his ear till I find out something about what he's doing. It's fascinating. I mean, and I keep telling people in the music business who want to get into it, what do you do? I say, learn as much as you can about everything. The more you know about everything, the more resonant anything you do will be. Your music will, people ask me, who was I influenced by? I say, well, what's the sound of a Monet water lily? And what's the sound of a Van Gogh cypress? That's just as important to me as the sound of a piano player. And I learned more from pianists and trumpet players than I did from clarinet players. But you do learn from people until finally, you know, you find your own bag, as they say. You keep learning and learning and learning from everybody and from everything. And what's the influence? Well, everything is influential. If you have a set of sensibilities, you go through life, you're influenced by what happens.
That's true.
And some of it comes out in your music.
And your music was unique.
Well, I'm unique, so we're all unique.
You're unique,
My
though.
thumbprint is unique, so...
I hear bands today playing the arrangements of a lot of the other bands, but very few tackle your arrangements.
Well, it's not...
Because they don't have a clarinet player that can play your part.
More than that, it's a little different. A lot of people out in the West Coast they are alumni of orchestras that I never cared much for. Stan Kenton, for example. Stan was a little... What's the word? The music was a little pompous, a little overblown, and a little, we used to call it zoot-sooty, a little overstated. And I never cared much for it. But see, the players out here learned from that band. There's a marvelous story about him. A guy named Pete Rugolo, I think it was in the trumpet player, who's a bright guy. He's kind of funny. Stan got up one day and he'd given to making these speeches, and he said, well, we've done artistry and rhythm, we've done innovations in jazz and blah, blah, blah. Next, and Pete said, I think, Stan, it's time we start swinging. Which got a big laugh out of the band.
Hey, that brings me to something I wanted to ask you. What is the difference between jazz and swing?
There isn't. If it doesn't swing, it isn't jazz. I mean, I can't
a lot
understand.
of people play these things that go on forever, and I can never find where they're at.
Earl, we live in a world of misperception and misstatement. We speak in total confusion, and as a result, we live in a confused world. Here are the Tutsis killing the Hutus, and the Hutus killing the Tutsi. You know, what is that? My God is better than your God, bang, you're dead. We live in a state of, that's the utter extreme. We live in a state of total confusion, and most people use the word swing era. I don't know what the swing era is. We played music that swung. If it didn't swing, it wasn't good jazz. Miller was the biggest seller of all. He didn't swing at all.
No, you outsold Miller.
Well, no, not really. He's outselling everybody now because he died. And they made him a hero because he got killed in the plane.
He is now, but...
in our day,
in your day, when
my records at
Begin
one
to
point,
Begin was the single biggest selling record of
it's
the big
probably
band
the
era.
single biggest instrumental record, and
It
it drives me
outsold
crazy
the mood.
today. 20 million to date, at least. I don't know who counts. I mean, I wouldn't want to try to count 20 million.
No.
Keep you pretty busy for quite 20 million years, maybe. Yeah. Anyway, the point is that I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about playing music, and people ask you what style, I didn't have any style. My idea was to play the music and let the music dictate the style of the arrangement. You wouldn't play a tune, a ballad, in the same way you'd play an up tune. So, for example, I play one of mine called back bass shuffle. Yes. We had a certain approach to that. It wasn't the same as a ballad like Stardust, which was a quite different thing. So my idea was to let the music dictate the form. And form following function, function following form. It's all one. I can't see where the mystique is, where all this mysterious thing. The trouble is we like to use big fancy words when we could use simple words.
We can
say what we mean.
Pigeonhole everybody again.
Well, as I say, pigeonholes are useful because if you're going to talk in any kind of sensible way about a series of things, the world is pretty complex. We have to use them. But we must understand that the map is not the territory, you know. We don't live with territory. We don't live with maps. We live with territories. We walk on streets. We don't walk on maps. And there's an old story about a woman crossing the street, and a cop pulled her, just pulled her back just in time to avoid being killed by a truck. She said, "But I had the light." And the cop said, "It isn't the lights that kill you, lady. You got to look at where you're going."
And they don't protect you either when a truck is coming.
So here lies Jonathan Joe McVeigh, who died defending his right of way. It's an old story, but we try to be sensible, and I don't see any reason why common sense has to stop when you get into a thing called art. I mean, one of the things that's happening today in the world of jazz is there's so much complexity going on that we are in danger of losing any possible connection with our audience. Much of it is now going right smack over people's head. I have a joke that I love, and I use it very often when I talk about these matters. A fugue, definition of a fugue. The instruments come in one by one, and the audience walks out one by one. That's pretty true. And when the music gets so complex that we lose all perception of what's happening, no reason why naturally at the other end is Lawrence Welk saying, "Here's Melancholy Baby." It's very simple.
You can identify it, too.
And you can hear it. Whereas, you know, you take the average jazz band today and they turn a tenor sax player loose, and he'll play 16 choruses, and he said everything he had to say in 8 bars. And maybe that wasn't much to say either. So, you know, you've got to know what you're doing. And there's a joke, I think I told you the joke about the Africa safari. People walking through the forest, and the guide saying, "Oh, those drums, oh, those drums, those drums." Finally he says, "What's wrong with the drums?" And he says, "After drums come bass solo." Well, the trouble is, most people wait for the bass solo and not realizing that all they're hearing is a lot of muttering, bum, 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 bum.
Yeah.
The average bass player doesn't have that much to say.
There isn't that much you can do.
Well, there are 2 or 3 or 4 maybe fine bass players who have something to say, but even so, it's a pretty cumbersome instrument. It's not something I would write fugues for. I wouldn't write a concerto for bass. It's pretty boring.
It is.
And let's face it, but people applaud. They've been trained, you see. It's so strange when you think about this.
Let's pause for a moment for a public service announcement. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Our guest is Artie Shaw, the #1 band leader from the big band era. Artie, you were about to make a point about audiences.
Well, I was talking about the general confusion that surrounds most of our thinking about everything. Music happens to be one of the subjects we're discussing here. I want to make a point that I think is kind of interesting. I talk to people. I do lectures, and every time I make this point, they applaud. People really think it makes sense, and it does. And I ask them, well, why don't you follow what I'm saying? Well, I can't. I had the same thing with Woody Herman. I asked him once, you know, this is what happens. A man will be playing a solo, and he finishes, and he sits down, and suddenly the audience starts applauding. Now you hear this applause, and it covers the next thing that's happening.
The next solo, yes.
The next guy might be doing something where he takes the ending of what the other fellow did, which is improvisation, and improvises a new approach from it, and goes from there to something else. You missed that whole point. People are whistling and cheering. And I used to say to Woody, why do you say, now that was Joe Yifniff on trumpet, ladies and gentlemen, now the other guy's starting to play and you won't let the audience hear it? He said, well, the audience likes that. I said, I don't think so. Besides, what do you like? He said, well, it's not what I like. I said, yes, it is. If you're going to, there's 2 ways to approach a piece of music. Play what you like or play what people like. Over there at the other end is Lawrence Welk saying, I'll play what you like. Now, you want to be something and do something of your own. Play what you like and let the audience learn from that. Well, the audiences, you tell this to people, they say, yeah, that's a good idea. Why not let the band play when it's all finished? When you're in a concert hall, you don't applaud a cadenza. The guy just finished playing cadenza. You don't start applauding. You wait till the piece is finished, and then you applaud to your heart's content. I tell audiences, look, I'm going to play the music, and when it's finished, you can applaud all you want. I'll introduce the soloists one by one. That's okay. Don't applaud in the middle of the piece.
That makes so much sense.
Well, it does make sense, but people don't want to make sense. More often than not, they'd rather not make sense. It's easier to kill people if you don't make sense. And we have a natural tendency toward violence and toward all kinds of confusion. That's what I was talking about. Anyway, it's a little off the beam. Where were you? You were asking me about how I got started.
Yes.
That's a long story, and for me, kind of dull.
Shorten it, but I'll
try to just hit the high spots. I was a kid, and I used to go to vaudeville. I didn't like my life at the time. I didn't like where I was living. I didn't like the life I was living. My parents weren't doing too well. My father was not happy with his life, and a lot of that rubbed off on me. And I was a single kid, and I was very lonesome. And I used to go to theater. I used to sneak into the vaudeville theaters. And I heard a guy one night come up and play saxophone. stand up on the stage and walk down to the footlights. And it was a Ned Wayburn show, and it was little girls dancing and all pretty in the lights, and I thought this was nice. He got down on one knee with a blazer and a straw hat, and he played a song called Dreamy Melody on an alto saxophone, or I think it was C melody. Well, that was my idea, get hold of a C melody sax and learn to do that. So I did. I got hold of a saxophone, and I'm very, what's the word, autodidactic. I don't like teaching too much, and I suspect authority. Look where it gets us in the world. So I don't like authority, and I never did. As a kid, it was a natural bent of mine. So I got hold of the horn, and I was supposed to get 5 free lessons with it. And the guy gave me 1 lesson, and I went home, and I learned what to do. So I started coming in playing tunes. He said, no, kid, you got to walk before you run. I never took another lesson. I wanted to run. I was in a hurry. Like any red-blooded American boy, I wanted success now.
Okay.
I didn't want to wait. So that's what happened, and I had to learn and learn and learn. I learned a very important lesson, however, and I keep telling people that lesson. It's a very good one. What's the big lesson? Keep on keeping on. Whatever you do, keep doing it. I read books about, say, Matisse or Picasso or Van Gogh or anybody. They kept on doing it. Matisse was brought over here, one of his paintings was brought over here in a group show way back in the 1900s, I believe. And he was picked out as the most awful painter that ever lived. No idea what the human figure was about. His color sense was terrible. He couldn't draw, and it was awful. Why did they have him? Everything that they later gave him Legion of Honor for. It's the old thing of the worst thing you do, and you keep doing it, you make your imprint finally.
I see.
And people begin to see, if you know what you're doing to begin with. If
People begin to understand what it is you're doing.
Well, you've got to have some idea what you're doing. You've got to be pretty clear on what you want to do. But if you are clear on that, and you've got to learn that good is not what you want, great is what you want. And you have to ignore the good to get to the great. You have to get along without good.
You have to pass through good to
Well, you have to
move
pass
on
through it.
to-
You got to pass through like to get to love. Most people use the word love as though it's a single word. No, love is an extension of like. You have to like so much that finally it becomes silly to say like. You love chocolate. You love a woman. You love a dog. You love a lot of things. You love your
Piece of
children.
music.
There are all kinds of love. And the same with music. Well, everything is, as I say, very simple if you break it down to its fundamentals. And the big trick is to know what the fundamentals are. And in music, I learned the fundamentals. I had to learn that. But once you learn them, you can ignore them. But you have to know them. Most people today decide they're going to go out and ignore the fundamentals. You do that, and you're off in chaos. And chaos may be okay, but it's not very good music.
Disorganization doesn't work in you.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't work in almost anything, unless it's hit or miss. Sure, you can throw up a bunch of deck of cards, and one ace might come in for it, but you can't count on it.
No.
So you've got to know what you're trying to do, and if you know what you're doing, you can keep on keeping on till you get it. People have said, I mentioned earlier that Hemingway once said his faults became his style. He stayed with them. And you stay with Matisse, his faults became his style. The very things people didn't like became the things they bought. Here, poor Van Gogh, he couldn't get a painting sold in his lifetime. In his entire life, he sold 2 paintings, aggregate sum, the two, $35. And
Yeah.
his brother was an art dealer, worked in an art, they wouldn't let him hang his brother's paintings. It's pretty terrible. Now, you know, here he comes and somebody buys 1 painting for $78 million.
Yes.
Well, it's nothing to do with painting. That's obscene. No painting is worth $78 million. I don't know what worth means. Worth is what you can get, I guess.
I want to come back. Now, you picked up the saxophone.
Yeah, I
Did you
learned to
begin
play
to go
that.
to the theater to play the saxophone, or how did you become professional?
I didn't become professional for a long time. Professional is when people pay you. It's that simple.
I understand that.
Well, you play and you get better and you get better, and finally somebody here and says, hey, I want to get in my band. Then you're a professional. I mean, if it's $5 a week, it's professional.
Okay.
When I was working years ago, I had the best job in America in radio. That was before television, many, many years ago. We're talking about 1930. I was working as a staff musician at CBS. At that time, CBS was a dream. It was Columbia Broadcasting.
Right.
Then it became CBS.
Well.
But I was getting $100 a week. Now, I pay a secretary $500 a week today. $100 a week, that meant $5,000 a year. Wow, that was a lot of money. But of course, you could buy much more with that. There's a marvelous story about Paul Getty. Somebody interviewed him once and asked him how it felt to be a billionaire. He said, well, you've got to remember, a billion don't hardly buy what it used to. Nothing's
A billion doesn't.
A billion don't. It don't hardly buy what it used to.
No,
well,
that's beautiful.
But in my day, $100 a week was an acme. It was a kind of, you reached the summit. And that was when I became a professional, when I was working at CBS. Before that, I played around with little bands. Wherever they would have me, I played. I showed up. That's the other little, my 11th commandment
Now,
is
you
show up.
actually grew up in New York City, didn't you?
Well, I didn't grow up in New York. I was 7. My parents moved to New Haven. I had no choice in the matter.
New Haven, okay.
New Haven's where I grew up. When I was 15 is when I began to play a horn, and then somebody heard me and took me to the then biggest leader in America, in New Haven, rather, America, John Cavallaro, and he had a little band. It was a good band, and I sat down and played in that band. I sat down and auditioned, and I played a little what they called a hot chorus, and he liked my playing, so he
was
said,
this
okay.
on clarinet?
No, I didn't have
This
a
was
clarinet. I
saxophone.
didn't know what clarinet meant. I started on a C melody saxophone. I learned to play in little what do you call it, amateur shows. And I'd get up and play Charlie, My Boy, oh, Charlie, My Boy, a terrible little tune. And a piece of sheet music, the piano player in the pit had it. So then somebody told me, you can't play a C melody if you're going to play in bands. You have to have an E-flat alto. Well, I didn't know from that an E-flat alto was pitched a third higher, mine a third higher. So I'm playing the same notes. But they come out and said, Charlie, my boy, it's Charlie, my boy, da, da, da. I didn't realize that. So I got up on the stage with my brand new alto saxophone, and I started playing the piano players in another key. And that was quite a scuffle. And well, I didn't know. Then I thought, oh my God, I got to learn all over again. I got to learn to play this in another key. It was terrible. But I decided, keep on keeping on, and I did learn it. So I finally got a job in a band. And when I got to this audition, the guy heard me play, and he said, yeah, that's fine. So he stuck a piece of music in front of me. And he said, can you read? I said, yeah, thinking he meant read. I could read. I read all the time, books. So he put this music in front of me. I said, what am I supposed to do? He said, play that. I said, I can't play that. You mean I'm supposed to play those notes? He said, yeah. I said, I don't know how to do that. He said, well, you can't read. You can't get the job. So I said, can you hold it a month? He said, a month. I said, yeah, I'll be back in a month. So I went away and I learned to read. I knew E-G-B-D-F. And I knew F-A-C-E. Everybody knows that. So that F was here on the saxophone. E was here. I learned that. And over and over and over until I learned. A month later, I came in and could read.
You got the job.
I'm a fast learner.
Yeah.
And a slow forgetter.
Back to the fundamentals.
Yeah, back to the fundamentals.
We need to pause for another public service announcement. We'll be right back with Artie Shaw. Stay with us. Our guest is Artie Shaw, and I was going to say my favorite, and Artie said, I want to talk to you about this number one stuff. So, Artie?
Yeah, well, number one is a bad conception, you see, because it is treating an art form or a craftsmanship, whichever you like, in a way that pretends it's an athletic contest. I mean, I can measure number one in long jumping. I can measure number one in pole vaulting, and measure one in terms of speed.
But I can measure number one in the way I respond to something.
Yeah, but that's your response.
That's
is a
my
subjective one. I'm talking about number one objectively. There's no such thing. I may be number one to you. I may be number 10 to someone else. I may be not in the running to others. There's the point of it's a bad concept. It's as though we're talking, as though we're in a contest. We're not in a contest.
No.
If it's art, you're doing the best you can. I don't know who's a better painter, Van Gogh or Rembrandt. You can't make that judgment. You can only say both were very great craftsmen, and both did what they had to do. I happen to like one thing, I happen to like another. I know I might like one Rembrandt better than another Van Gogh. I might like one piece of mine better than a piece by Heifetz, but it's going to be rare. But they might like another piece by Heifetz better than by Beethoven.
Okay.
So you can't make
I'll
these.
accept the fact that
it's a bad concept, and it trains us to think wrongly. One of the things we do is think badly. And see, it's the same thing as when I talk about audiences in a concert, a symphony concert. They don't applaud. They've been trained not to applaud till the piece is over. Then politely clap. In a jazz concert, they applaud every 3 minutes. And that makes no sense. Because
it drowns out.
While you're applauding, you can't hear. Just as well you can't listen with your mouth open. You can't hear while you're talking. I'm talking now. When I go to a concert, I listen. And when I talk to people who know more than I do about something, I listen hard. And I comment on what they've said. This is my comment on your number one concept.
Yes, it is.
All right.
I'll be very careful.
Well, just number one, in my opinion, is fair.
Okay.
Right?
In my opinion.
That's fair. It needs
fair.
that. It's
All
got to
right.
be understood that it's an opinion being stated, and it is by no means the only opinion.
But we can measure the sales of certain records.
Well, that's nothing to do. That's commerce. That's nothing to do with music. Lawrence Welk will outsell me, and the gangster raps will Tupac Shakur will outsell me, and he isn't playing a note of music. So that's nothing to do with it. You see, we're talking subjectively about it, and we're trying to talk objectively about a subjective matter. Can't do it. That's where the confusion arises.
You see, folks, there's just no way I'm going to win any argument with Artie Shaw.
Well, then there's nothing's winning. We'll either learn something or we don't.
That's true.
That's what you win.
That's true.
That's all.
That's true. Artie, you've had the acclaim, you've had the fame, you've movies, television, radio, personal appearances, everything. And a lot of young people these days want this.
Well, I keep telling them, beware of what you wish for. You know, the first part of that book, you may be so unfortunate as to get it. I told this to Mel Torme not long ago. You know, Mel has had a stroke, and we
Yes.
talk occasionally. I said to him, you were a very lucky guy, not with a stroke, but you were a very lucky guy as a performer. He said, why? I said, you never had one smash hit. And he knew exactly what I meant. Because you have that, and it's like an albatross around your neck. You can't do anything with the audience keeps saying, do that.
Do the same one over and over.
Over and over until you get bloody sick of it. And I couldn't stand that. That's one of the reasons I got out of the music business. Writing is a subjective thing. You sit down by yourself, all alone. By the time the audience reads it, you're through with it. So they can say it's great or it's bad, has no effect, you're on another one.
Artie, I want to thank you for being our guest. They're telling me our time is up, but I'm going to ask you to stay.
All right, we'll do another one.
Okay, thank you for joining us for Adventures in Life, and we hope you'll join us soon again.